Hey, have you ever felt like someone's watching you even when you're completely alone? Today, I'll show you the scariest stories from Reddit. Real experiences people swear actually happened. Mysterious disappearances, eerie coincidences, and terrifying encounters that defy explanation. Are you ready? Then turn off the lights, put on your headphones, and let's step into the darkness. The Reddit, no sleep. Every night, my entire town locks down for 12 minutes. I finally learned why. You know the kind of town where everyone knows everyone? Where the local diner serves coffee in mugs stamped with your name, and everyone will lend a hand to a neighbor in need? A place where generations of families grew up together? Well, that is the sort of place where I live. Sure, it is a bit rustic. Hell, I barely have reliable internet. But it is nice enough for us. It's the kind of place where time feels like it's standing still, except for one thing: the nights. The nights here are a little different. I've lived here all my life, and there's no place I'd rather be. Or at least, that's what I used to think. This place has its quirks, like any small town, but there's a big one that stands out for us. You see, every night, without fail, at 11:38 p.m., the town locks down. I'm not talking about just closing up shops and less people being out and about. I'm talking about a real lockdown. Doors slam shut and are barred, windows rattle and lock, and everyone knows they have to be inside and stay inside, at least for what happens next. The next part is strange. No one ever sees anything moving out there directly, but we all just know. We just know that somehow, something outside is trying to get in. An eerie silence falls over the streets. It's like the whole town is holding its breath. Then in 12 minutes exactly, it is just over. I've always wondered why it happens at exactly 11:38 p.m. People here don't talk about it much, but when they do, they whisper. They say it's just the way things are, that it's been happening for as long as anyone can remember, but I know better. I've seen it. Whatever it is. The first time I noticed it, I was still pretty young. I think I was 10 or 11. I'd stayed up late reading some of my favorite comic books. My parents warned me, like many other kids in town, that we had to go to bed early. But if we did get up, then absolutely no leaving the house or leaving any windows or doors open. I was not asleep, but was still following the rules when I heard the strangest sound. It was a low, guttural hum that seemed to vibrate through the walls. I looked out the window, and that's when I saw it. The streets were empty, but there was a presence. It's hard to describe. It wasn't a person or an animal. It was something else. Something that didn't feel like it belonged. It moved with this strange, jerky motion, like it wasn't entirely in control of its own body. It radiated a disturbing sense of distortion that made my head hurt, and my eyes had a difficult time focusing on it. I could feel this overwhelming sense of hunger that made my skin crawl. Before I knew it, it was over. It had passed my house, and I realized I had been staring out my window in a hypnotic daze. It was almost midnight, and I went to sleep, and did not tell my parents about the disturbing thing I had seen. Those of us who are still here know that whatever that thing is, it's out there, stalking, hunting, looking for anything, an open window, a cracked door. Disappearances are frequent, especially for such a small town. The police have a whole song and dance for anyone who goes missing from the outside, but when it is a resident, well, it is more of a case where the families of the victims are reprimanded for not having known better. No one knows why the window of time is so mercifully brief. Almost just as suddenly as it starts, it's over. By 11:50 p.m., the streets are quiet again, and the town feels normal. But it's not normal. It never was. People here have learned to live with it. They lock their doors, shut their windows, and pretend it's not happening. I asked my parents why we don't just move, and they never gave me a good answer. All they said was, it wouldn't do any good. We have to endure. It has to be here. It is safer for everyone if it's here. It did not make sense. I know people can get attached to places, but it felt crazy to me. I couldn't just pretend this was normal. Not after what I saw. Not after what I felt. There was something out there, and it was worse than anyone would believe. It was just recently that I saw it again. It was a normal night, at least as normal as nights could be in my town. I was getting ready to go to bed when I noticed that my cat Quincy was missing. I looked everywhere, but I couldn't find him. Then I heard something and looked through the window to spot a familiar shape, and my heart sank. He was outside. He must have gotten out when I had come home earlier and was sauntering along the sidewalk. clueless to the impending danger. The time was 11:36 p.m. I had no idea if the creature did anything to animals, but I did not want to find out. I had never let Quincy outside before, and he did not come back to my shouted calls for his return. I had to do something dangerous and stupid to save him. I rushed outside, sprinting toward him and trying to grab him and bring him in before it was too late. I managed to reach him and pick him up, but then I froze when I sensed a presence as I was scrambling back to my door. Quincy's ears folded back and he hissed. I felt paralyzed, and then I thought I saw it again. It was different this time, larger and more overwhelming than before. Its presence seemed to fill the entire street, pressing against the houses like an unseen force. I tried to run, but my legs wouldn't move. I was frozen in place, my breath caught in my throat. To my horror, it seemed to finally regard me. Quincy jumped out of my hands and ran back to my house. He had fortunately evaded whatever interest the thing might have had with him. The creature's head twisted unnaturally in my direction, its distorted features coalescing into more recognizable shapes. Staring into the grotesque visage forced a scream out of me as I beheld the blasphemous impossibility. I turned and sprinted away, screaming like a maniac, my heart hammering against my ribcage with such force that each beat felt like it might crack my chest open. The sound of its pursuit echoed behind me, a wet slapping noise like a monstrous jellyfish gliding across the ground. Its deafening roar filled the air, shaking the ground beneath my feet as I ran for my life. I did not know if I could get away. No one I knew had been outside and survived. I ducked into an alley, my hands shaking as I pressed myself against the wall. My breath came in short, sharp gasps, and I could feel sweat dripping down my face. I didn't dare look around the corner. I didn't dare move. And then I heard the harrowing screams. They sliced through the air, piercing and full of terror. My heart raced as I strained to see who was making them, but all I could make out were shadowy figures caught in the open. The screams were short, sharp, and then they were swallowed by the night. The deafening silence that followed only added to the fear weighing down on me. I stayed pressed against the wall, trying to make myself as small and invisible as possible. The darkness seemed to come alive with every creak and rustle, amplifying my fear. I held my breath until I heard the sound of the creature moving away, and then, just like that, it was gone. But the eerie stillness lingered, haunting me even after the clock struck 11:50 p.m. The streets were once again quiet, but my nerves were still on edge. I stumbled back to my house, every step feeling like a race against time. Quincy waited anxiously at the door and bolted inside with me, seeking shelter inside. The horrible night had left me shaken, but grateful to be alive. Whatever that thing is, it does not belong in this world. It is not of this time or place, and its presence is so unsettling it makes your mind ache just to catch a glimpse of it. No one can tell of its origins. Maybe they are lost in the depths of history, but whatever its history, it remains. Always there, lurking in the shadows every night without fail. At that point, I did the one thing you probably think everyone should have done by now. I left my hometown. I moved to the largest city I could reach to get away from it all. My parents did not approve. In fact, they tried to tell me I could not go. I was so desperate to get out of there that I had to sneak away in the early morning, when they could not interfere. I never understood why we all stayed there and tried to ignore the eldritch nightmare that hunted us at night. It seemed so simple, and I felt better at first. The city felt alive with the hum of traffic and the distant chatter of people during the day, a cacophony that made me feel safe, anonymous. Indeed, I thought I'd left the nightmare behind, that the creature was just a memory, a relic of a past I could bury. My new apartment is a cozy studio on the 5th floor, with a view of the bustling streets below, high enough where looking out the window does not fill me with dread at night. Unfortunately, something happened last night that has shattered the fragile illusion of my peaceful transition. On the first night in my new place, I sat on the edge of my bed, flipping through a magazine to distract myself from the creeping unease that had settled in the pit of my stomach. The clock on the nightstand read 11:28 p.m. I told myself I was being paranoid, that the creature was gone, that I was safe now. But the weight of the past lingered, a shadow in the corner of my mind that I couldn't shake. By 11:38 p.m., the city outside my window was eerily quiet. The usual sounds of traffic and distant music had faded, replaced by an unsettling stillness. I tried to focus on the magazine, but my eyes kept drifting toward the window, the darkness beyond the glass pressing in on me. And then I heard it, a soft, tentative tap against the pane. My heart skipped a beat. I froze, the magazine slipping from my fingers and falling to the floor. The sound was light, almost imperceptible, but it sent a chill coursing through my veins. I told myself it was nothing, I was just being paranoid. But then it came again, another tap, this time more insistent. Or I didn't move. I didn't breathe. My eyes were fixed on the window, the darkness beyond it seeming to pulse with a life of its own. The tapping stopped, and for a moment there was nothing but silence. Then, a faint scratching sound, like claws on glass. My heart sank. I knew that sound. I knew what it meant. I knew. Slowly, with my legs trembling beneath me, I rose from the bed and approached the window. My hand reached for the curtain, hesitated, and then, with a deep, shaky breath, I pulled it back. What I saw made me freeze in terror. The creature was perched on the fire escape outside my window, its twisted form silhouetted against the moonlit sky. Its eyes glowed with an unnatural light, and its presence seemed to fill the room, pressing in on me with an unspeakable horror. I tried to scream, but the sound caught in my throat. The creature's head tilted to the side, its gaze locked on mine, and I felt a wave of dread wash over me. It was here. It had followed me. And then, as if in slow motion, its mouth opened, revealing rows of jagged teeth, and it let out a low, guttural growl. The sound shattered the paralysis that held me in place. I stumbled back, my voice finally breaking free in a raw, terrified scream. The creature's form seemed to blur and shift, its presence filling the room with an unspeakable darkness. And then, everything went black. I regained consciousness, and I know it is not over. There is no escape from this thing that has followed me. I consider what my parents had said when I asked them why we never moved. Then, with dawning horror, I realized the truth of their words. It is safer for everyone if it's here. They did not mean it was safer for us. They meant it was safer for everyone else. They knew the danger. They stayed to keep it there. Now in my ignorance, I have made a huge mistake. Somehow, it knew I left. It has followed me here, to a place where over 1 million people will soon know about its existence, and maybe more if it moves beyond that. I am so sorry for bringing it here. I didn't know. Please, for your own safety, stay inside between 11:38 p.m. and 11:50 p.m. By now, it might not be safe wherever you are as well. My sister went missing from a town that doesn't exist. When my sister Shelby disappeared, even when they declared her dead, I knew she was still alive. I could feel it. And I was right, sort of. And so, here I am, sitting in my car at 2:10 a.m., near a darkened bus stop that probably hasn't seen another visitor in decades, waiting for her, despite being warned of the consequences. I'm writing to distract myself from the nearly overwhelming, increasingly strong prey instinct to run, the urge put as much distance as possible between myself and what I can only describe as the receding nothingness beyond the tree line. 28 days ago, Shelby was driving through Meyerton, a tiny town I'd never heard of until I got the call from the police, until it became the last place my sister was seen before seemingly falling off the face of the earth. I'm still not sure why Shelby was there in the first place. It was far out of the way from Billings, where she'd been headed, but I suppose that'll be one more thing I'll never get the answer to. Not from her, at least. They declared her dead. When the Meyerton police called me, they told me they found her car, that bright red 15 Mini Cooper she loved so much, wrapped around a tree on the side of the road. If she'd been in the car when they found it, maybe I'd have been more inclined to agree with them. The car was mostly totaled, but what did remain of the interior was immaculate. There was no blood. Her purse and suitcase were there, keys still in the ignition. It was still locked from the inside. Everything was still in the car, everything except for my sister. But the local authorities told me she was dead, and despite my pleas for them to look for her, they straight up refused. No need, they said, so I knew it was on me to find her. I was running late on my first visit to Meyerton, A delayed flight and mix-up with my rental car when I finally landed meant I wasn't approaching the town until it was nearly 12 a.m. To top off an already bad situation, I was lost. My GPS told me to take exit 19C, but I couldn't find it. I'd taken several U-turns and looped back a few times, and each time grew more and more frustrated as I'd see 19A, 19B, and then exit 20. It's not like 19C was recently closed either. The guardrails were perfect, seamless, and beyond the highway was nothing but trees and craggy rock. No, it was more like there wasn't an exit 19C. There never had been. And to further exacerbate my building anxiety, my GPS refused to provide me with an alternate route. As far as Google Maps was concerned, the only way into Meyerton was to take an exit that didn't exist. After 3 more loops around the highway, I finally gave up and stopped at a crappy motel conveniently located off exit 19B. I asked the guy at the desk if he could suggest a way to get to town, since at that point, I had no clue how I was supposed to find Meyerton. He looked tired, and not merely 1 a.m. tired. No, he looked exhausted by life, tired, and didn't even bother glancing up from the book he was reading when he dismissively told me, "Me? It'll be back in the morning." "The exit?" I asked. Sarcasm a thin veneer, as I tried masking my racked nerves and that I was on the verge of tears. Or the town? He just shrugged, non-committally. I lost it in that moment. Head in hands, I broke down sobbing on the dingy check-in desk of that seedy motel. He was kind enough to ask if I was okay, and I instantly found myself telling him everything. Why I was headed there, how unhelpful the authorities were, how I knew the only way I'd find her is if I went searching for her myself. He just shrugged, non-committally. I lost it in that moment. Head in hands, I broke down sobbing on the dingy check-in desk of that seedy motel. He was kind enough to ask if I was okay, and I instantly found myself telling him everything. Why I was headed there, how unhelpful the authorities were, how I knew the only way I'd find her is if I went searching for her myself. He introduced himself as Gary and told me that my sister Shelby was gone, that nothing good could possibly come from me going to look for her. When he couldn't talk me into turning around and going back home, he offered me a room for the night. As he handed me the key, he reluctantly told me that 19C would be back at 2 a.m., but would be gone by 11 p.m. the next night. I knew he was messing with me, that no road would magically appear. I figured I'd try to get some sleep and then drive to the next town over to see if someone else would help me. So you can imagine my utter shock the next morning when, sure enough, just like Gary had assured me, where before there had been a solid metal guardrail, there was an exit. I'd found 19C. The worn gravel and peeling paint of the off-ramp seemed to indicate a well-traveled road, too. So I followed the winding 1-lane road through the trees, and I was confused yet relieved when I found my way to Meyerton. That relief was short-lived. The police were somehow even more unhelpful in person, insisting Shelby was gone and I should go home, move on. It didn't matter that she'd only been missing a couple of days. It didn't matter that there wasn't a body. I wasted hours at the station, changing nothing, convincing no one. The case was closed, they told me. As far as they were concerned, my sister was dead. Now, based on what I've learned, I almost wish she was. That would have been more merciful. A kindness, even. As I continued my own search for her, the longer I lingered, the more I realized that something was very, very wrong with the town of Meyerton. Every single house that wasn't already demolished sat abandoned, the structures slowly being reclaimed by overgrown lawns and encroaching woods. The sidewalks were empty of people, and I only saw 2 other cars on the road in all the hours I was there. The few businesses that remained open had only a handful of customers inside, and they were clearly not happy to see me there. Every single person I asked told me the same thing. It was eerie how their responses were so similar, almost word for word as if rehearsed, that they'd never seen my sister before, that there was nothing for me in their town and I needed to leave. And then, with what seemed like a genuine sadness, they were sorry for my loss. Eventually, 10:50 p.m. rolled around and I'd still found nothing. The stores all closed at 10 p.m. Even those traditionally open for 24 hours elsewhere were closed 10 p.m. to 3 a.m. I'd watched the town shut down, watched it empty of people. So, frustrated, I pulled into one of the many empty parking lots, and I stared at the shadowy expanse of trees where her car had been found. The air was stale and heavy with an unnerving silence, thick enough to choke on. It was in that moment, as I sat in the red glow of the shut-down pumps of the only open for 19 hours gas station I'd ever seen in my life, that I first picked up the hint of wrongness in the air. I could suddenly feel that there was something out there beyond my line of sight, something waiting just past the trees, something terrible. I realized that Gary and the handful of people I'd encountered were right. I needed to leave. I had that epiphany a little too late, because what began to happen next was the cherry on top of my shit Sunday of a day. As I took a final look into the trees, as if they could give me a sign, an answer, darkness unlike anything else I'd ever witnessed began to seep through them, swallowing them. It choked out the light from the moon. It was like a curtain of nothingness, a presence only detectable by the absence of everything it touched. It carried with it a smell of burning meat mingled with rotting fruit that suddenly flooded through my open windows. I found myself frozen as it approached. As it swallowed the houses down the street, I could feel a strong sense of emptiness, one that sucked the air out of my lungs, threatening to crush me. At the same time, it felt right. An extended invitation towards the embrace of nothingness, towards something ancient and insatiable. The encroaching darkness swallowed the crimson glow from the gas station pumps. It was only the realization that the blackness had begun to nullify the light of my headlights that snapped me out of it. I three-point turned my way the hell out of there, peeling out and pushing 65 down the winding road out of town. In that moment, I was thankful the town was empty of police, too. Approaching the on-ramp at 10:59, I didn't understand what was happening at first, why the road I was driving along looked faded. That's when I saw something metal shimmering faintly in the distance. It didn't look solid, as if it wasn't entirely there, so it took me a moment to realize what it was. A guardrail. I tried to swerve and slam on the brakes before I hit it, but I was going almost 90 by that point, and the laws of physics and I had differing opinions on what the correct stopping distance would be. I braced for an ending that I wondered if my body would even feel, brain even register, but none came. No. Instead of the sound of metal on metal, my ears were met with the angry honking of the person I'd cut off as I messily swerved onto I-15. I was back on the highway, the light of Gary's seedy little motel visible from across the way. I took one last glance at the place where exit 19C had once been, and once again ceased to be. I didn't know what else to do, so I went back to the motel, breathless, describing every moment of my ordeal to Gary. He didn't look even remotely fazed by my story, instead opting to stare into space. I realized then that the police were right. She really was gone. She'll be back. Well, part of her will, he finally told me, perhaps in response to the look of hopelessness that must have been written on my face. 2:30 a.m., 28 days after she first disappeared, at the bus stop off Main Street. Are you sure? That's where they always come back. He smiled sadly, before engrossing himself back in his book. That was weeks ago. As of this morning, it's been 28 days since Shelby first disappeared. I touched down in Billings and made the 6-hour drive to the outskirts of Meyerton, waiting patiently for the exit to appear. I debated stopping by to see Gary, but decided against it. He'd asked me not to tell him if I chose to go back. He said he didn't want whatever happened to me on his conscience, but it's 2:29 a.m. now. And here I am anyway, sitting at the ancient bus stop in the empty city of Meyerton, a city that has only recently returned to existence, staring into the last of the receding darkness. I can see Shelby in the distance now, pale in the faint moonlight, barefoot, immaculate for someone missing for a month and emerging from the woods. I found her. Even from here, I can feel something radiating from her, an emptiness, a yearning hollowness, a hunger for something far more precious than mere flesh and bone. I should be running to embrace her. I should be ecstatic. Instead, I'm frozen, overtaken by another emotion entirely, one I've never felt before around my sister. Fear, no, not just fear. An overwhelming, suffocating terror. It's not just that now familiar emptiness that radiates from her the same way it did from the beckoning nothingness when it nearly claimed me last month. It's not even the way her skin seems too tight on her frame or that she's taller than I remember. No. It's that awful, predatory smile on my sister's face, one I have not seen in all of our 26 years together. She moves as gracefully as she did in life, but in her eyes, I see only death. I realize, as I watch the palpable nothingness incarnate that is wrapped in my sister's flesh, that I'm not sure what exactly she wants, what it is that she hungers for. In a way, I wish she hadn't come back. I should have believed those that told me she was gone, because she is. She is utterly devoid of everything that had made her my sister. As I fight the urge to run to the car, to leave Meyerton before whatever it is that wears my sister's skin like a too-tight suit can reach me, I can't help but replay my final conversation with Gary in my head. So, I'd confirmed, she'll be back in exactly 28 days from when she went missing. He'd nodded, no longer able to meet my eyes. But I need to warn you, Sheila. If you thought it was bad when she disappeared... He paused to stare past me and into the dark expanse of trees off the highway. It'll be 1,000 times worse when she comes back. I told him I knew I was doing the right thing, that trying to save my sister could never be a mistake. Oh God, she's closer now. I cannot tell if she seeks to fill that void by dragging me back with her, or if the hunger is more primal, more literal. All I know is that the Shelby that disappeared, that I lost, is not the same Shelby that I see before me now. I'm frozen to the spot now, as if I'm trapped by her gaze. I'm going to share this while I still can. Maybe I made a mistake after all. Still think it was just a coincidence? Or maybe something's watching you right now. If you made it this far, you're braver than most. But tell me, would you stay calm if this happened to you? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and let me know in the comments if you dare. Until next time, stay safe, if you can.